Welcome to Aging Insight with your host, John Ross and Lisa Schollmeyer. This program is made possible by
Welcome everyone to Aging Insight. I'm Lisa Schollmeyer and I'm here with John Ross, and we are elder law attorneys. And that means that we are attorneys that help seniors and address the legal needs of seniors and families that might be caring for seniors or persons with disabilities, because it's just a legal minefield out there for those folks, and you need information. It's vital that you have information. Life is complicated, and it's even more complicated when you're dealing with things like retirement and medical insurance and Veterans Administration benefits or Medicaid and Medicare. So as elder law attorneys, we cover the gamut of those subject areas in order to assist seniors and families.
Yeah, that's what we do professionally, and we know that there's a lot of this information that you just need to know out there. There's ways you can navigate through this, and then there's ways that you can not or do it poorly. And we don't want you to do it poorly. We want you to accomplish your goals as you get older. And often what we see is people that are navigating through, particularly as they get older, they start increasing the amount of medical care that they use. Right,
and you know, John, the most important thing to many of our seniors, ages 65 and up, has to do with Medicare that's available to address those health issues.
That's right. That's going to be the primary payer source for virtually everybody in the United States over 65. And you might have a Medicare supplement, or you might have a Medicare Advantage plan, but all of these things are governed by rules that are promulgated through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services and Congress and all of these other things. And you know, when Congress makes rules and then those rules get interpreted by big agencies, and then those rules get interpreted by little agencies, and then those rules have to get interpreted by the people that actually deal with these programs, it can get to be a unnavigable nightmare.
Yes, so today we're going to untangle just a little piece of some of the Medicare rules and how Medicare is applied to you as a patient. So that's going to be our topic today. And John, there's just almost nothing as important as dealing with this.
That's right. So all of this can kind of go back to the Affordable Care Act, often called Obamacare. And Affordable Care Act, the whole purpose of the Affordable Care Act was to provide lower cost insurance or subsidized insurance for a wider range of people. And that meant that some people who could not previously afford insurance would be able to afford it because the government would help pay part of those premiums. Now, the plan behind this was that some of the help for paying that premium would come because by forcing everybody to have health insurance, younger people who use less medical care would be paying for premiums that they weren't using. That means there's extra premium money which could be used to help subsidize some of these lower income folks. But the biggest part of all of this, this extra money that they needed to fund the Affordable Care Act, was going to come from cutting back on what Medicare pays. And Lisa, Medicare pays lots of things. It pays hospitals, it pays doctors, it pays home health agencies, it pays hospices.
It pays for medical equipment.
It pays for medical equipment. There's Medicare prescription drug programs. And admittedly, in the last 2 decades or so, there has been some fraud and abuse. within
True.
Medicare.
Well, true. In such a large government program, of course, there's going to be fraud and abuse where you have medical providers, such as a doctor or a medical equipment company, overbill for services, or maybe provide services that were really unnecessary just so they could bill for the service. No doubt that type of fraud and abuse has been involved in the Medicare program. But, John, when Obamacare came in, the idea that the Obamacare policies, insurance plans that were going to be available to younger people would be funded in large part by cuts to Medicare by ferreting out the fraud and abuse in the Medicare program and cutting that out, that we would save so much money on Medicare from cutting out the fraud and abuse that we could afford to subsidize the premiums for the younger people on the Obamacare policies. That was the idea 7 years ago when the Obamacare policies came into effect, but we now have data about how well that's working.
Yeah, and it's not working out so well.
No, it's not. At this point, we've realized, yes, there was some fraud and abuse, but certainly not enough has been cut from the program through fraud to pay for Obamacare. So what else are we doing here?
Well, so the other idea then behind all of this was, let's, they said, well, we're paying too much. There's too many unnecessary services that are happening out here. Maybe these doctors and such are, they're not being good managers with the money that we are paying. So, for example, a doctor might like an MRI for a patient, but does he need an MRI to diagnose that patient? Would an X-ray, which is much cheaper than an MRI, be just fine? And so one of the things that Medicare through the Obamacare said was, what we're going to do is we're going to cut down on the amount that we send. And the idea behind this is like you take your home. If your income goes down, you're gonna learn where to cut corners. Maybe you're not gonna go out to eat in that expensive restaurant. Maybe you'll cook at home tonight because your income, and so you'll be a better money manager with how you spend on things.
Right. So this idea of forcing medical providers to become better money managers because the money from Medicare for medical expenses was reduced was also a large part of the funding for Obamacare and the funding cuts that came to Medicare. And John, I think I want to take a break before we dig into a little bit about how these cuts and how this payment system is affecting our seniors. And you are definitely going to want to hear about this, so stick around.
At Advantage Senior Care, our goal is for seniors to stay home longer, stay healthy, and above all, stay happy. Introducing the Independence Check. A trained caregiver will visit your loved one in the comfort of their home, providing assistance with medicines, meal prep, caring companionship, and more.
Miss Smith, I just stopped by your dad's. He's taking his medicine and doing great.
See how an Independence Check can make all the difference in your loved one's day. Call Advantage Senior Care today.
The Wadley Senior Clinic has been such a blessing for our family. Because they specialize in geriatric care, they take the time to really focus on Dad's needs. Their exam rooms are specially designed for seniors, and they offer lab and x-ray on site. With monthly educational programs on health and wellness of the mind and body, our healthcare questions get answered. Best of all, they accept Dad's Medicare benefits. See what the Wadley Senior Clinic can do for you. Wadley Senior Clinic, where healthy relationships begin.
Welcome back to Aging Insight. I'm John Ross here with Lisa Scholmeyer, and today we're talking about the state of Medicare. What's going on, particularly since the implementation of the Affordable Care Act about 7 years ago? Part of the Affordable Care Act, the way they were going to fund the subsidized insurance programs, in part was by making some significant cuts to what Medicare pays providers like doctors, hospitals, nursing homes, home health agencies, and those sort of medical providers. And before the break, we were talking about that they wanted these entities to be better money managers.
Right.
And so they figure, well, if we give them less money, then they will have to figure out where the fluff is.
Yeah, where the inefficiencies are and fix them.
Right.
And so what has happened is on Medicare, before these changes, Medicare was a fee-for-service program, which meant that if your doctor ordered 3 different tests, then Medicare reimbursed the doctor for each test that was ordered. That was, for every service, there was a corresponding fee. But with the changes to Medicare included with the Obamacare legislation, we have now changed to what is called a capitated payment system. And that word is capitated, which means that essentially a patient is diagnosed with an issue, a code for that issue is entered into the computer and said this patient perhaps has severe pneumonia, and there's a code that goes with severe pneumonia. That code is entered into the Medicare system computer, and Medicare says, all right, doctor and hospital, to treat a person with severe pneumonia, we're going to give you a total payment of $7,000. And that payment is to cover, any days of hospitalization, any IV antibiotics, the total care necessary to treat this episode of severe pneumonia in this patient. But the kicker here is that's all the funds and all the money that the provider and the doctor and the hospital are ever going to get related to this patient. So John, if you have a patient who has severe pneumonia and they're coded that way, and the providers, the healthcare providers receive that payment, but the patient doesn't recover as quickly as expected, or the patient has additional complications, then there's no more billing to Medicare that the providers can do related to that patient.
Well, going back to my X-ray MRI example, if you've got pneumonia and you've got stuff in your chest, they might take a chest X-ray. And then they say, okay, well, based on the chest X-ray, you have pneumonia, and we treat that with antibiotics, and it's usually about 2 days in the hospital. And so for the $7,000 that we're going to get, that's going to pay the treating physician, that's going to reserve the bed in the room, that's going to cover these X-rays, and it's going to cover the antibiotics to treat all of that. But 2 days later, this particular patient has not gotten better.
Right.
And maybe they need additional X-rays. Maybe they now need that MRI. They need to see maybe there's something else going on in there that they can't tell with just the X-ray. Unfortunately, like you said, Medicare has already said, this is all the money you're getting.
Right. So at this point, the cost of treating that patient is shifted to the providers. And so the idea was to make the providers very efficient with the kind of testing and treatment they offered to patients and still keep the same quality of care, and we would save money on Medicare. But what's happened really is that what we've seen now is that the sickest patients, the most chronic patients, are not being welcomed and being treated by providers, because the providers, John, they feel like they're going to lose money on a very sick patient.
That's right. If you've got 2 different people that both have an issue, and one will recover very easily because maybe they're young and healthy and this is just a fluke, versus somebody that has 15 other things wrong with them, and once you bring them in, you're going to be responsible for all of these different things, but you're going to get paid the same for each of these. Yeah, you're not, you don't want to touch the one that's got all these other problems, because that's just going to cost too much money.
Right, so basically what's happening now is the providers there's an incentive to take the healthiest sick patient or perhaps the patient that is shown that they're going to be compliant, with the treatment plan. So this is really affecting a lot of seniors. There have been some statistics that have been done that show that of the hospitals that spend the least per patient per episode, John, it might shock you to hear that those patients don't do very well.
Well, and what you have to understand is that the hospitals that spend the least per patient, these are the hospitals that are rewarded under the Affordable Care Act. These are the ones that are given the gold seal of approval because you're doing such a good job managing your money, and yet these same hospitals oftentimes have the absolute highest preventable death rates.
Preventable death rate. That's not a good rate that I want to know about. But so these hospitals, they are rewarded not only with positive ratings from Medicare, but they also get a monetary or a money reward because they've spent the least on these patients, and they are actually given a bonus payment by the Medicare system for spending that. And John, that just seems like a bad incentive. So as a senior patient, you need to be aware that those are some of the kind of incentives that are now out there in the Medicare system.
Right, and so as when you're denied treatment or things like that, understand where that may be coming from, and understand kind of what and bring these sort of things to light. This can also come into effect in a long-term care standpoint as you transition out of a hospital, either back home or into long-term care, particularly if you need to go back into that hospital, because these same capitated payments apply throughout the
episode. The medical episode.
Right. So if we're talking about a stroke, that might involve ICU, then
regular acute care,
intensive care, then acute care, then inpatient rehab, then outpatient rehab, and then you're better. But we're talking one payment for all of that to many different providers. And that can be a big deal. So we're going to take another break, and we're going to talk about how some of this can affect your access to long-term care services and your ability to get back home if you want to. So stick around. We'll be right back.
As things get older, they require more care. This car and I have seen a lot of miles together. But because I take care of her, she runs just like she did in 1955. That's why I chose the Wadley Senior Clinic, with an individualized care plan designed just for me and a convenient location off Jefferson Avenue. They have everything to keep me running like new. It's not about the miles, it's about the journey. Let the Wadley Senior Clinic keep you happy, healthy, and cruising down the road of life.
At Advantage Senior Care, our goal is for seniors to stay home longer, stay healthy, and above all, stay happy. Our individualized plans are tailored to your loved one's needs, from meal preparation, shopping, and light housekeeping to bathing and dressing, mobility assistance, and companionship. Our trained caregivers will help maintain your loved one's independence while providing you with peace of mind. See how our family can help yours. Trust our locally owned and family-operated senior care service. Call Advantage Senior Care today.
Welcome back to Aging Insight. I'm John Ross, here with Lisa Scholmeyer, and we've been talking about Medicare and something called capitated payments, where under the Obamacare plan, they tried to cut costs, basically cutting costs primarily to Medicare. And one of the ways they did that is by, instead of paying the doctors for each service that they performed, but instead they would provide all of the different service providers. They would just have one lump sum of money that had to be divided among all of the different service providers based on whatever your particular illness is. Like, so for example, if you had a stroke, you might have hospital care, you might have a neurologist that does not work for the hospital but works independently. You might have a radiologist that works for a radiology group. You might have some inpatient rehab. You might have outpatient rehab. You might even then have home health after that stroke. So all of these different, and these are all different providers, and they're all different entities, but there's only one big lump sum of money,
Right.
according to Medicare, for a stroke. They say, okay, you've got a stroke, here's how much we're going to pay. Divide it among all of these providers.
Right. And John, that explains, a lot of my clients have asked me, why are all the doctors going to work for hospital affiliated clinics? And that's the reason, is because an independent doctor gets a much smaller slice of that payment pie than the affiliated doctors with the hospital providers. So
Right. So yeah, you if you like your doctor, well, you can keep him, but he works someplace else now. So, but where you run into this. So, for example, imagine somebody that has this stroke and they're in ICU, and maybe their stroke is more complicated than the average stroke. So they're going to use up more services during that hospital time frame, while they're in ICU, while they're in intensive care, while they're in admission, and maybe even through that inpatient rehab. Now they're ready to go back home.
are they?
But if they're ready to go back home, but they're going to need some home health to come with them, if they've used up all the other money.
Right. Then in that case, it's going to be very difficult to find a home health agency that is willing to take on that patient. And ultimately, these providers, they are at this point private sector providers, so they can do an admission assessment to determine whether or not they want to take on a patient, or that they have the know-how to take on that patient. And if there's no money left for the payment on that patient, then the home health agency may not take them.
That's right. Or it could be that there is some money, but that the needs are going to be too high, and the provider doesn't want to take them. I think you recently had this with somebody.
Right. Yeah, I had a lady who needed some inpatient rehab at a skilled nursing facility, but she had some other medical issues going on that were going to be addressed shortly, but she had the rehab need now. And the rehab facility refused to take the patient until her other health needs were addressed, because the rehab facility knew if they went ahead and took the patient in for rehab purposes, if her other medical issues flared up during that rehab stay, then the rehab provider, would have to share their payment to cover the health needs that had arisen during her rehab stay. And they felt like that was too much of a risk, and they didn't want to be responsible for payment for these other non-typical rehab medical issues.
Yeah, and this stuff is very complicated, but it's not real complicated to understand if you're at the hospital and your doctor is saying you need to go to this nursing facility to get rehab, and the nursing facilities are saying we won't take you.
Right. And so then what? And and we're seeing this affect particularly the more complex, the most sick patients. And so if you can't find the rehab facility to take you, then you go home and there's no more rehab services. So maybe you would have made some additional progress, but now you don't have the services to help you get there.
That's right. Medicare you get Medicare automatically when you turn 65. It's not a need-based program like Medicaid, for example. But so often people have a tendency to think, well, once I get on Medicare and I pay for a supplement, that's going to cover all of my medical needs, and for the most part, I'm not going to be going out of pocket for any of these. And I think what people need to understand is, at least under the current regime that we're seeing right now, you better be planning on going out of pocket for medical care. And what that means is protecting and preserving assets so that you can have additional resources to privately pay for things when these government programs fail you.
Right. So, and this is a bit of a political issue, of course, when we talk about Obamacare and Medicare funding. So, at least as we're filming this episode, we're sort of in a political season. But, Medicare comes up, that's a program that Congress votes on. You as a senior need to be very aware of where your representatives and where the candidates that you are thinking of supporting, where do they stand on restoring funding to Medicare and to fixing some of these problems? So,
and whether you're on the right or on the left, you might be surprised by that answer.
Right. So, so check it out. But for seniors, really, very few issues are as important as access to medical services, because John, our bodies, they're just not designed to last problem free.
That's right.
Our whole life. So we do need those medical services.
That's right. Well, thanks again for watching Aging Insight. You can always listen to our radio show on 98.7 FM and 740 AM every Saturday at noon. You can also pick up a copy of our Aging Insight magazine, and you can even check us out on the web at aginginsight.com, where you can watch past episodes of both the TV show, you can listen to old radio shows, and even read transcripts and get all the information that we have to offer. Otherwise, we'll see you next week with a brand new episode.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Aging Insight program with John Ross and Lisa Scholmeyer. This program is made possible by